Rightly so. Nice to be here. How are all of you today? I don't like sitting down right away. I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine. Couldn't have written the book without him. This is Tom Sykes.
Thanks very much.
I've never heard so much bass in so little time.
Yeah.
I think we're going to just start right in. Tom, do you want to take...
Yeah, sure. John, me and John, I had the great privilege of helping John to write the book, and it was kind of the best job I've ever had, because like about halfway through, John just really found his voice and just wrote the rest of the book. So literally,
it's not quite like that, but
literally all I had to do was go and stay at his house, eat his food, listen to his music collection, and occasionally go, John, how about a bit more about, recording the Rio album or stuff like that. So it was a fantastic experience for me. I know this is like a real kind of musos gig here today, so we're going to try and keep the questioning on the kind of music. Just to tell you a bit about, to get John to introduce the book a bit to you. John, would you tell people a bit about why you decided to write this book now and what your kind of vision was for it originally?
I'd love to do that, Tom, but you know what, actually I'm just going to sidetrack for a moment and just tell you all about the last time I was on this stage in this room. I was actually helping out my stepson Travis, and he formed a band with a group of his peers from Brentwood High School, and they didn't have a bass player, so I sat in with them on the stage a few times and actually started to have a really good time playing with them. And then one afternoon the singer turned to Travis and said, you know what, if John wanted to play with us live, we could actually put him behind a screen. That was my last rehearsal with those fuckers. Yeah, none of them are in music anymore. Okay, more seriously, yes, I suppose the turn of events. Why now? If anybody, and I'm sure some of you have read interviews with me talking about the book, the death of my dad, coming up on 3 years this Christmas, and his sickness leading up to his passing. It was very traumatic, as it is, I'm sure many of you have experienced that yourselves. I did want to memorialize my dad, and I wanted to memorialize both my parents and their times, and how they set the scene for me to become a music guy, and how the music of the 60s and then the 70s just took me over. I never had a music lesson. As a teenager, I was never put in front of a piano or given any kind of formal. It just wasn't. I don't think my parents would have ever thought of doing that. The fact that I actually even went to school was quite kind of an achievement, I think. That's really where it started out. And I didn't know that memorial was going to be a book. It could have been a song or a suite of songs or something highfalutin. But, from that very sort of honorable desire came Tom, and who came to me at the beginning of last year and said, John, we know each other through our wives and sisters, his sister, my wife, and said, you know what, John, if you wanted to write a book, now would be a really good time. And I thought about it for a couple of months and started putting the ideas together, and then fate played a hand, and Simon Le Bon developed a problem with his throat. As many of the fans know, last summer we had to cancel 3 months of shows. So instead of going off on the road around Europe all summer, which I was very excited about, I was due to spend the summer doing nothing. So I called Tom and said, let's go for it. So that's how come we're sitting here.
Exactly. And it's been quite a ride getting it all done. When I was a kid, there was a magazine called Smash Hits that was a very famous pop magazine that John and the Duran boys were a big part of. And in an early interview, they asked John if he could be any household appliance, what would he be? And John answered,
a refrigerator, because I want to be cool.
Oddly enough, he was asked this same question about 5 years ago in another interview. He was asked again if he could be any household appliance, what he would be. And do you know what you replied, John?
Well, I know one thing. Actually, this clinic should be called Dealing with the Banal. No, I said toaster.
Because he wanted to be hot, obviously.
There he is.
Yes, it's funny that, when everybody's out there learning, we're all trying to learn our scales and our getting our chops up, but really the key to success in the pop business is getting the right answer to those questions. What kitchen appliance would you like to be?
Exactly. But John, as you were saying, as a kid, your house wasn't a particularly musical house, was it?
Well, we didn't have there was no instrumentation. I mean, my nan had a rickety old out-of-tune piano that I never saw anybody play, but I was drawn to it, and I did like sitting at it and thumping away. But there were no instruments in my home. My parents, neither of them played an instrument or sang an instrument, but they loved music. My mom particularly. We found things out about them. I mean, the great thing getting to do a project like this is there's a little bit of the archaeologist in you. You have to go you have to delve into the family archives. And one of the things that I found was this book, this sort of a hardback lined writing pad that my mother had written in her own hand the words to about 60 songs, and this would have been about 1940-ish. And of course, this was her own smash hits. This was her own lyric book, and she'd written the lyrics out to all these songs like, my honey and I, and babe. They had all these. There's a few in here, isn't there?
Yeah.
But she had a real love for the popular song, I think, is that but she was shy. She never. I don't think I ever saw her sing a song. But she would, and she appreciated. She appreciated celebrity. She appreciated, right up until she would always have something to say about new singers, and when they came on, she'd always have something to say about that Rod Stewart. I don't like his hair. He needs a, or Brian Ferry. Oh, I like him now. He's. I like the way he dresses. I like that tuxedo, the bow tie. It's very smart.
And you're as you say there was a lot of music in the air in the home, but there weren't actual musical instruments. But what was your first musical instrument?
Well, I did get a guitar, and I think I must have been about 14 or 15, and I got them to buy me a guitar on off one of these mail order catalogs, kind of like you have the Sears catalog here. And but nobody told me anything about tuning it. I have to be. I'm a slow learner, and I'm a slow study. And unless somebody's really very, I think I got a set of pitch pipes with the guitar. I think that came with, but I was just clueless, and I didn't have. I should have signed up for a couple of lessons at the same time. But no, I'm glad I didn't, because everything worked out just dandy. Thank you very much. But yeah, and the guitar I would play it, and it just sort of went out of tune, and it was probably never in tune, because when I took it out of the box, it was already out of tune. I know it sounds stupid, but that's how it was.
But also you somehow, I mean, you talk in the book about how you didn't really think that a normal guy could be a musician, you know, because musicians were supposed to, you know, go to music college or spend time in transit vans going up and down the motorway.
Well, I was quite lucky, really, because it was the times. I mean, I was just talking to a fellow bassist about Chris Squire, and you know, Chris Squire was the archetypal bass player at the, you know, in the early 70s, you know, and the music magazines when I was a teenager, I mean, every year they would have their poll, you know, readers' polls, and in 1975 and forward there would be, you know, bass player of the year, you know, and it would be Chris Squire or John Paul Jones or John Entwistle or Paul McCartney, you know, and they would have keyboard player of the year, and they would have, you know, album of the year, and blah 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 blah, drummer, and so on and so forth. I mean, they just don't do that anymore, you know. And I think in part we've got the Sex Pistols to blame for that, because the Sex Pistols came along in 1976, and they I mean, and it was a revolution, you know. And I guess in a way, you know, the scene did need that, because we were going from. It was going from creativity to indulgence, I think. And I remember going to see The Who in 1975 at a rather large, and it was just it was a huge cattle shed in the middle of nowhere, and it was the first time, you know, bands were starting to put on these American-sized shows in the UK, which meant, you know, meant going a long way out of town, paying a high ticket price, getting a really bad view of the stage, and the Sex Pistols just changed all that. And within about 6 months, really the most exciting music was happening in rooms this big, you know, and you just weren't interested in 5-minute long solos anymore. And you know, the Sex Pistols' whole thing was really, and you know, behind them you had Malcolm McLaren, who was this fantastic revolutionary master strategist of popular culture, who said the less you know, the better you are equipped to comment on the culture, to be a part of the culture. And that was, I guess, from in a musical sense, was given voice by Sniffing Glue, who were the kind of the first voice. It was a mimeographed fanzine that came out of London, and the first edition of Sniffing Glue had line drawings of 3 chords, E, A, and C, and it said, "Here's 3 chords, now form a band." And that was, where is that fucking guitar of mine? You know, and you know, and the first, and I was just determined to be a part of that scene and that movement, and I knew that it didn't matter that much, you know, that I didn't know much. I actually started playing the first time I went on stage in a band, I had 5 strings on a 6-string guitar, because I played guitar for a little while before I switched to bass, and I was just playing 2 strings together in unison, but you know, with a fuzz pedal and a phaser, and you know, you could make it sound like something. I mean, you know, it probably wouldn't hold up very well if we were to listen to it today, but it worked in the moment, and it got me hooked on live performance.
And you talk a bit about, you were just mentioning then about how the most exciting music was happening in rooms this kind of size rather than on big stages. And I like the way you talk in the book about following a local band and the excitement of like kind of following one of those bands and watching them going from a pub, you know, upstairs above a pub to somewhere like this, to, you know, to actually being on top of the pops, which I think was what happened with Blondie.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of bands. I started. Yeah, I mean, that was the next transition. I mean, we went from seeing The Who, you know, with 12,000 other overpaying customers, to seeing The Clash in a room like this big, to then seeing kids like myself, 16, 17-year-olds, in their little startup bands, you know, in pubs and around the city of Birmingham. And you could really, and by this point I'm friends with Nick Rhodes, and the 2 of us and our clique of friends were going around, and we're seeing a lot of bands, you know, and they're all and we're getting to know them, and we're checking out their flyers, and we're checking out, hey, they got a new drum kit this week, or they bring in a new piece of instrumentation, and how that piece of, like, I don't know whether anybody remembers the Wasp synthesizer. It was a really a very important piece of kit actually in about 1978. It was the first synthesizer that Nick bought, and and a couple of bands we saw had this synthesizer, and you could do really cool stuff on it. It cost 190 pounds, I think it was. And seeing a piece of kit like that sort of incorporated into some band, and how that would influence like a new song or a couple of new songs, and I think when you're developing a sense of what you want to be, and you want to be in music, and you want to have a band that's different and has got its own thing. I don't know how much you can learn from a band at the Staples Center. I feel like when you're starting out, it's good to see what you got to take. To me, anyway, it's about getting that first step. How do we get on stage at the Roxy? When I moved out, one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I wanted to demystify the process of being successful in the music business. When I moved to LA, I was shocked by, I'd meet musicians or songwriters, and they would say, yeah, so I got this lawyer, right? And and so he's talking to some labels, and we're going to get a deal. And then, when I get a deal, I'm going to put a band together. And then when we get a band, we're going to play some gigs. And I thought, wait a minute, that's kind of the wrong way around, isn't it? To me, it's really simple. It's like like-minded souls get together and sweat over chords and grooves, and then every chance you can get, you take it to the stage. And whether you're playing to 10 people. I talk about one of the things I get on in the book is residencies. We talk about residencies. I love doing residencies. I got to do one at the Viper Room with Steve Jones and Matt Sorum and Duff McKagan, and it's like when you have that regular gig every Monday night, and it's like, and you can forge a relationship with people. It doesn't matter if there's only 6 of them the first, and so what if they're all relatives? This next week, maybe 2 of them will bring a couple of friends, and you can build it, and you can actually. I don't believe in, what's that word when you kind of like, where you sit back and you kind of go over the gig and you say, well, what did we do wrong? What can we
post-mortem?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not into post-mortems. The next gig will always be better than this one, always. And if it's not, then the next one will be. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And there's quite there's a good bit in the book where you talk about how your perception of yourself changes, and the perception that your peers has of you changes the first time you play in front of your schoolmates, basically at the school concert. It seems like picking up a musical instrument changed your perception of yourself, and indeed quite a lot of stuff changed about you.
Well, I was not a cool kid at school, and I was glasses wearing, I was a 4-eyed nerd, and I didn't excel on the playing field, nor in academic studies, but the first time I appeared in front of my classmates with a guitar, and I think the first time I played in public, it was the sixth form dance. Not that anybody was dancing to what we were playing, but it was the first time that I'd actually played. It was a $30 guitar, but I borrowed an amp from somebody. We had a big muff pedal. And you could make some noise on that thing, and I definitely the girls started looking at me differently. After that, it's quite a weapon, and I think when so right away I knew, that this could be a good way to get an identity, and maybe get. I could feel it, I could feel the way. We were probably terrible, but you know, it was there was something impressive about it.
As you say, the first guitar you had was a kind of $30 guitar. I know we're at a bass player conference here of kinds, so should we talk a bit about the instruments that you've played throughout your career?
Oh, blimey, okay, all right. Well, I started, you know what, I was going to read something from this,
Yeah.
I was going to read, are we still going to do that?
Why not? Yeah. Would like to hear John maybe read a bit from the book? Yeah.
Okay, there's a, you know, I don't know if I really want to use that. So, but why not? Okay, I'm gonna, so this, the next couple of paragraphs are really just about, we just met some managers. Managers are really important, having said that about lawyers. But, our commitment to Paul, Michael, and the Rum Runner, Paul and Michael were the group's managers, brought us a degree of comfortability that we'd not previously experienced. Paul and Michael invested in some gear for us. I needed to step up from the cheap Hondo bass I was using and the cumbersome amplifier combo I was schlepping around with me. I replaced that with a slick PV amp head and matching speaker cabinet. For my next bass, I was looking for something I could call my own, something with style. Another example of how the rules were changing at the beginning of the 80s was in musical instrument manufacture. Fender and Gibson had the monopoly on 70s music. Everyone played one or the other, and most bassists used Fender Precisions. I didn't want to be part of any tradition. Was that the times or the teens? As I've gotten older, tradition and being part of a continuum of bassists, writers, and performers has become more important to me. But in 1980, I wanted to stand apart from what had come before as much as I could. There was a wave of manufacturers coming out of Japan, producing instruments that were strong and stylish, and the common knowledge was that they made the grade. The same thing would happen with cars 10 years later. I liked the Ibanez basses that Sting used, but they were expensive. At Jones and Crossland on Queensway, that's an instrument store in Birmingham, I saw and tried out a bass I liked the look of by a Japanese manufacturer I'd not heard of before, Aria. It had a similar look to the Ibanez, and there were two models on offer. The 1200, which had two pickups and active electronics, which required 6-volt batteries to power it, and the 600 with a single pickup, no active electronics, but sleek and very pretty, with a two-tone wood grain. It was also half the price. Maybe the Barrows were footing the bill, but I had no intention of taking advantage of them. It was a good choice. The Aria would become my signature instrument and get me around the world. I've never had the kind of relationship with my basses one often hears guitar players talk about having with their 6-string lovers. I don't cook breakfast with my bass strapped on, and I've been known to take it to bed with me only once or twice in really desperate times. I never became a real tech head, and I'm still using PV amplifiers. Every night at the Rum Runner, we were being exposed to the best of contemporary music, European dance music, funk, disco, and jazz funk, all accompanied by a steady stream of vintage wine, champagne, a little smoke now and again, and even a little toot. The next few months found us auditioning for singers and guitarists. They would come to us from all over the Midlands, some from farther afield, having answered ads that we had taken out in the music press. We would tell the guitar players that the singer was sick, and we would tell the same story to the singers about the guitar player. And all the time, Roger, Nick, and I were refining the backbone style of what would become the sound of Duran Duran.
John, you first came to America in September 1981, and it was an interesting moment then with the video clubs and, of course, the impact of video and Duran Duran. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously video was the X factor for Duran Duran. You know, the X factor is that bit of technology or some kind of cultural something that is happening that you could tap into, that you had no, you know, sense. I mean, I think Elvis and television, you know, the Beatles and multi-track recording, you know, for us, it was video. And we made a video for the first single, Planet Earth, because we didn't want to have to go to Australia, where there was a little bit of heat around the song, and EMI was saying to us, look, if we could just get the band down there, you know, we could have a #1. And our managers were like, we can't go all the way to Australia, you know. So it was suggested that we make this music video. And I think I knew, obviously, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, that was a massive, you know, I felt that was a one-off though, that the video, I don't think Queen performed that song live on any TV show. It was always the video. I'm sure we've all seen that video. But you know, I wasn't really aware of the music video as a thing, you know, that everybody was doing. So, you know, we had success with Planet Earth. It got the song to #1, and so it became it became something that we would do with every release. And Girls on Film was the 3rd single off the album, and the music of the band, the music was getting play on a circuit in the United States called Rock America, and I think there was a late night TV show on Friday Night Videos, thank you, and there was a chain of, there were clubs all around the country, and the Vogue at this moment, which was 1981 I guess, was to have screens above the dance floor, and they would project footage of sort of, you know, cutting edge music videos that could be danced to, and that became a thing for us. So we produced Girls on Film. We made this long form dance night version video, so it was like a 6-7 minute long video, kind of smutty, you know. It had all these racy images in it. It was just perfect for the video network. And so by the time we came to America for the first time in fall of '81, you know, we got 2 videos, maybe 3, that were already sort of, you know, very popular on this video club network.
And do you think that made a difference to how you were perceived in the US versus how you were perceived in the UK? Or was there a difference between how you were perceived in the US versus the UK?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it was quite hard to. I mean, America is much harder to succeed in than the UK. I mean, we talk about the UK, and I mean, the UK is a very small place. You know, it's about the size of California, and there's an insatiable appetite for novelty and newness in all the arts, especially music. And I think that if you want to have a hit in England, in the UK, you can have one. It's not that difficult. You've got to want it. You've got to work for it, but it's entirely doable. Having a hit here, you know, requires, you know, it's a military operation, you know, and it really, you know, you've got to have a powerful label working for you, or a really stupid video on YouTube. We had both without the YouTube. And lost my train of thought.
But there was a fascinating bit, wasn't there, when the label made a big last push to get the Duran hit, and you got hold of something called the Abrahams report or something that told you kind of, you know, how, or said, you know, how to tweak sounds.
Well, we're into Rio now, which was 1982, and
yeah.
we've been to the States before. We came here the first time in '81, then we came back with the Rio album, and we really worked it. That summer we went back and forth across the country several times, and a couple of things that were happening. MTV. I maintain that MTV, radio here was just locked down. You couldn't get your songs on radio. They were not interested in new music. They were not interested in anything remotely alternative. It was all Journey, all Zeppelin, all day, every day. And I think that if there had been videos for songs like Stairway to Heaven or, you know, Jumping Jack Flash, I mean, there are videos, but, you know, that's what MTV would have played. MTV didn't really have access to what we now call classic rock, so they had to start playing cutting edge video. They had to start playing these videos that were coming out of the UK. So really, I look back on that now, and I'm sure you did, Paddy Palazzo, as a real golden age, because it was really the only time in the history of this country that there was a national alternative music network, and it was visual. You know, I mean, for the first 2 or 3 years of MTV, they were playing the stuff that really very few radio stations would play. It was very, very cutting edge. We noticed, you know, how cities where MTV was coming on air, states where MTV was coming on air, our records were selling more. We still, the elusive FM radio, we were trying to get on that, and in 1980, summer of '82, there was the Abrahams report was a report that was put together by a couple of radio programmers, and it was intended to appeal to radio programmers, saying, look, if you want to sell a lot of refrigerators, you know, then this is the kind of music you should be playing. And it was very descriptive about the kind of drum sound, you know, typified by John Bonham, and the kind of guitar sounds like Eddie Van Halen. And these were the sounds that you wanted to have your station broadcasting if you wanted to get that sort of late 20s consumer with money in their pocket, and thereby you could get your advertisers. And I remember we were on tour, and we were at an airport lounge somewhere, and our managers handed us out copies of this report and said, "Chaps, we need to read this. We need to understand. This is the key to getting the band on radio." And I was like, "Fuck that! That's bullshit, man." But you know, as we say in the book, but fortunately we weren't all so, you know, and Nick and Andy in particular, you know, were like, okay, well, you know, what does it mean? What do we have to do? And so we went into Cherokee, actually, just around the corner, with David Kirschenbaum, who had just produced Steppin' Out, Joe Jackson's 9-Day album, which we really liked. And he gave a tweak to the first side of the Rio album. And I mean, telling the truth, if I listen to those to them today, I can barely tell the difference. But right then, in that moment, it felt like we'd given, you know, we'd shown the industry that we were prepared to adapt and adjust. I think really it was just a matter of turning the guitars up a little bit. You know? But you know, it just gave the record label just something to go back to the radio stations with and say, look, they want it, you know, that they've done these FM radio mixes, and it was just enough. And I think that was the third time that Hungry Like the Wolf was serviced to radio here.
Right.
And then it
Kicked off.
Yeah.
And of course, 1982, that second tour of the US, you met some other really cool and really influential musicians. I'm thinking of Robert Palmer, and then in July, and then in September you met Niall and Tony,
Yeah.
who were to be, I mean, between the three of them, probably, you know, amongst the biggest influences
Yeah.
in your working life, I suppose.
Yeah, well, Robert was massive. I mean, I was a big fan of Robert's work. You know, I'd gone to see him play in Birmingham. You know, I feel he's still quite underrated, actually. But I met him backstage at the Peppermint Lounge in New York, and we got along right away. Niall and we toured with Blondie. We did about 12 shows with Blondie, and that was the first time we'd ever got to play at these amphitheatres that you have here, these sort of indoor-outdoor amphitheatres, sheds, what we call them. We never had, you know, we don't have those kinds of venues in the UK, so that was a good experience for us. And the last date we played with Blondie was in New Jersey at the Meadowlands, and it was David Johansen was on the bill, and Blondie and us, and Niall Rodgers, and he showed up with Tony Thompson. And you know, we'd been talking up Chic, you know, because they were a big influence on us, and so yeah, it was great meeting them. And you know, who knows, you know, when you meet these people, that you're going to be making records with them, you know, a year later. Or,
yeah. And you always said early on that one of your ambitions was to play Madison Square Garden by 1984. And you accomplished that. You describe in the book Madison Square Garden as having the biggest ego of any music venue in the world. Because he says that when you arrive in New York, from the moment you get there, you know, everyone's saying to you, hey, you're playing at the Garden, right, aren't you? But it was, must have been an amazing moment.
Yeah, it was. I wish I could have been there to appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, by the time, yes, we did have a plan, and it was kind of audacious. But you know, we thought we knew, you know, we thought we had it figured out, and yeah, by the time we toured the US for the third time, 1984, yeah, we were doing these arenas like the Forum and Madison Square Gardens, yeah.
And as you say, you weren't fully there, perhaps, in 1984. How kind of how fast and how bad did your kind of drug and alcohol habit take you, do you think?
Well, I thought one of the nice things about doing this clinic was that we wouldn't have to talk about any of that. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I did find, I couldn't take drugs and play. You know, I mean, that right out the box. And it was, you know, I remember the first time we came to LA, we played at the Roxy, and we did 2 shows. We did a Friday and Saturday, 2 shows each, 2 performances each night. We did a 9 o'clock show and a midnight show. And in between the 2 shows, I experienced a little bit of this sort of local pharmaceuticals. And we used to, and the second show, I mean, you know, I was so convinced that every song we were playing slow. You know, and I was, and we would have, you know, the sequences. You know, the sequences would be fired up from the sound guy on the side of the stage, and I'd be saying, "That fucking thing is running slow, man. What the?" But yeah, I kind of knew that wasn't working. You know, there's some other drugs like downers are quite good for playing. You know, you can get on this, like, you know, not in front of an audience. But if you want to, like, you know, just zone out and play for about 6 hours, I mean, that thing, you know, a little pot's quite good for that. But the uppers that I liked, you know, I liked uppers because well, they were a good cure for shyness, especially at 1 o'clock in the morning. But they were not good, devilish to play on.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, good sometimes for listening to music, right? Being in an altered state.
Uppers, I don't think at all, actually. Not for me, no.
Anyway, back to the music. Why do you keep Vaseline behind your ears when you are playing the bass?
He's asking you. Anybody know? No, it's no. I heard about that. Yeah, I used to get terrible blisters, and I mean, it was the greatest bit of advice that I got from Tina Weymouth, and I wish I could say she told me, but I actually read an interview with her, and she said that she'd heard that you know, a lot of the old jazzers in the 40s and 50s, you know, they'd have a little Vaseline on their ear, and they'd be playing away, and they'd just. And that changed my life. And now, I mean, I cannot go on stage without that bottle of Vaseline on top of the amp. And it's just, and I've not had, you know, I don't tend to play a lot when I'm not on the road or when I'm not in the middle of a session. You know, it's not something that I just do. I like to play piano a little bit, I like to play guitar. I don't play a lot of bass when I'm just alone. For me, bass is an instrument that's meant to be played with others. You know, it's like this. It's like, give me a drummer, I can play all day. But playing it alone, it doesn't quite, you know, satisfy the way that an instrument with a little bit more harmonic range does. I mean, maybe that's just because I don't play it well enough that I could get that kind of, you know, harmonic possibility. But I tend to play other instruments if it's just me by myself.
You quote John Lennon in the book, who advised that all songs should be written in a single sitting, but you quote him to disagree with him because that wasn't really Duran's style. Tell us a bit about how you guys typically wrote a song.
Well, I think because the way that we were formed, and we were kind of like, you know, it was Nick and I, and then it was Nick, Roger and I, and then it was Nick, Roger, Andy and I, and then Simon walked in. And by the time Simon walked in, there was like the sound of the band, the sequence of bass, drum, guitar thing was already there. And Simon just walked in and he had some lyrics and he started singing and it all fit together. And in a way, because of that, that's how we tend to approach our writing. And we're a very democratic outfit, actually. And one of the things that we've really held on to, that we fiercely, is our initial writing modus operandi, which is, you know, really don't come to the session with any ideas. You know, just come with an open mind. and it's like we all run at the canvas at the same time, and we just, you know, I mean, somebody might say fast, slow, you know, but you know, we love to jam, and Simon, I mean, Simon, God bless him, as a singer, you know, he has tremendous stamina for jamming. You know, it's not easy being a singer, getting in there for hours and hours, just riffing on ideas, but that's what he'll do, and you know, I mean, now we have you know, the recording, the way that we record everything. You know, there's nothing sort of pre-recording anymore. I mean, it's from the moment that the 5 people start playing, somebody pushes a record, we record everything, and we usually record it multi-track. So you know, we tend to write a little bit differently now than we did. I mean, we did one of those albums. I forget what the series is called. Classic albums, I think. And we did Rio a couple of years ago, and we all got to sit in the studio and like actually listen to the multi-track, and we were all just gobsmacked really at how well organized each individual part was, you know. And I think that Pro Tools has it's made the defining of choices, it's delayed the defining of choices in a not entirely healthy way, because by the time you're defining your choices in Pro Tools, you've got so many more choices. But you know, so as I say, we tend to record everything now, and your engineer becomes so important, because you'll come in after the weekend and he's been fiddling around and he's turned the drums around and he's added this little effect to the bass, and you're like, wow, that sounds like a single, you know. That's kind of, you know, I think the engineer plays a much bigger part, because the tricks you can pull off in Pro Tools are
great. Well, listen, in a couple of minutes we're going to throw the floor open to you guys to ask John a few questions. But John, would you like to read us something else first?
I mean, I've marked off a couple of... all right. I marked off... Okay, so I'm gonna read this one chapter. Sorry, bear with me. Actually, I just wanted to read this. When Roger first joined the band, I was still playing guitar, and I began to hone a more rhythmic style that would lock in with his drumming. We were venturing outside the punk bubble musically, and had a social life to match. We liked going to wine bars such as Hawkins, next door to Virgin Records on Corporation Street. No, I don't want to read this one. Okay, I'm going to do this one, and then that's going to be the end of the readings. Okay, this is about the last chapter in the book is Coachella. We played Coachella last year, and it was a fantastic experience. And you know, having kids and raising them in Los Angeles, you know, I was very aware of how significant, you know, an experience Coachella was, and I felt if we couldn't get on that show sooner or later, my kids were never going to speak to me again. So, behind the stage, to the side of the ramp, our band has gathered. We've stepped off the pair of golf carts that have brought us the half mile from our dressing room in battery-powered silence. The air is warm and electric blue. We acknowledge each other without words, using nods and smiles, backslaps and other gestures of encouragement. Instincts surge, every other concern falls away. Since 1981, we've released our songs on vinyl, cassette tape, CD, digital audio tape, minidisc, ringtones, MP3, streaming and download for purchase or rental. I've long since learned to relax and cease worrying about how the music finds its way to your ears. Just play, just write. As long as I keep those calluses on my fingertips hard and maintain an enthusiasm for making music, I'll be happy most of the time. We've come a long way together to get to this holy place, Coachella, and a lot has changed in the last 30 years. Cell phones, computers, SUVs, nose hair trimmers, supplements, Propecia, paperless itineraries, in-room humidifiers, steam rooms, saunas and gyms. pre-show massage, Twitter, Spotify and Amazon. Touring with 3,000 songs in my pocket and 30 books on an iPad. Therapy by Skype. Great coffee everywhere. Another difference is out there, where there are just as many men as women in the audience tonight. At day's end, my job is to be a catalyst for connectivity, to help bring people closer together, men and women, boys and girls. That's what the music has done for me. What hasn't changed are the notes that run up and down the neck of the bass, and the feeling that hits you when one note rubs against another in a way that sets the hair up on the back of your neck, and the sound of the crowd, and the feeling of adrenaline that charges through my body when I hear it, holding that 4-string machine gun on stage, less than 6 feet away from you. Simon is on stage. Simon is running through his vocal warm-ups, which we so often rib him about. Nick has a plastic cup in his left hand, and he's taking sips from it, now reaching his right hand upward to flash a snapshot on his camera. We all fiddle with our in-ear monitors, trying the volume, listening for interference. A photographer from Spin magazine wants to take a picture. We assemble reluctantly, everyone just wanting to get on with the show. It's an outdoor festival, so tour manager Craig will not get to give his usual cue to take the house lights down. Tonight that is one of God's jobs, and what a job of it he is doing. A glittering bauble of sunlight fights to stay above the horizon. A full moon appears, a late-coming VIP that takes a seat above the lighting gantry at 11 o'clock high. Nature presents for us a better light show than any human could ever have created. A perfect breeze causes my Buddha scarf to flutter. All the signs are good. We walk together up the ramp. The stage is set, the electronics are primed, the audience ready. Nick walks on first, in a black net snood borrowed from Lady Gaga. He walks across the stage and onto his riser, puts down his camera and touches the Andromeda synthesizer, from which issues forth a sample of the exact sound he used to begin our first single, Planet Earth, written and recorded over 30 years ago. My heart is pounding. There is no better time than this, when I am about to take the stage and the future belongs to me. This is what the moment feels like as I walk out onto the stage one more time. Roger's drums kick in, an 8-bar count, and I'm in with him, the galloping groove that started it all for me. 30,000 California kids, eyes and teeth smiling, cameras and cell phones popping, a million tiny seductions all at once. And the music never sounded better.
Great. No, absolutely. So I wonder if anyone in the audience has maybe got, I don't think we've got a mic, so just if you shout out, and if I might repeat the question back or something, would that work, so that everyone in the audience can hear it? I think this guy
So,
here.
how you doing, Mr. Taylor? This guy is being impressed. So, you mentioned Nile Rodgers. Speak to us about Bernard Edwards and how he was a strong influence on your playing.
Well, the first time I heard Bernard's playing, I think it must have been Everybody Dance, and it would have been 1976 probably. And you know, I'd never really listened to the bass. I never really separated the bass out. I was into guitar players, and thought maybe I could be a guitar player. But it was just at the time where I was looking to define myself as something different, and most of the kids that I knew, most of my friends were punk rockers, and the bass wasn't really a big deal in punk rock. But I heard Bernard's playing, I heard Everybody Dance, I heard La Freak, and I loved, and I started focusing in on the bass, and started thinking maybe I could play some kind of approximation of that style, and it could be sort of an interesting element in our sound. The first time I met Bernard, because I became friends with Niall, and Niall came to London and he produced Wild Boys. But I never met Bernard until later on, when Andy and I were talking to Tony about doing a side band, you know. And because when this production team broke, Niall and Bernard broke up, you know, Niall had this meteoric, you know, career as a producer, and Bernard was like in the background. Well, it was Tony that said to me, Bernard's the one. You know, he said Bernard's the quiet one. You know, he's the meat. And I mean, I'm not sure that that's really being fair to Niall, but that's where their relationships were at that point. And when we started the album that would become Power Station, I just assumed that Niall would produce it. But Tony said no, it's Bernard. And the first time I met Bernard was at a hotel in New York, and I was very nervous to meet him. You know, But very, very low profile kind of guy, very low key, all music, easy going. I mean, it's funny because people say, what's the best bit of advice anyone's ever given you? And actually I quote Bernard, and it's the most simplest, banal piece of advice really. Don't ever stop playing, you know, and I find that actually that's meaningful for me, because I can go weeks without playing. If I'm not on the road, or I'm not in the studio, if there's really no reason, I get into a, you know, I'll start watching Homeland on DVD, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and I'll forget to pick up the bass, you know, and I actually, that's the kind of advice I need, you know, it's real simple and direct, and I mean, I think the best job actually Bernard did was on the Duran James Bond song, because that session was out of control. Yeah, and you know, like John Barry was a real handful, and we were a handful, and it was like those sessions. I mean, we were under siege in the studio. It was madness, you know, and you know, and it was a tough. It's you know, those James Bond songs. You know, they require. You know, it's a tough remit. You know, it's not just another song. It's got to have a lot of bells and whistles on it, and Niall wasn't available, and so we got Bernard in for that. And I mean, it was literally that there was before Bernard and after Bernard. Before Bernard, it was chaos. Nobody was having a good time. Bernard just came in with Jason Casaro and took control. And the thing about Bernard was, you just knew that the thing was going to be funky. You knew it was going to be well arranged. It was going to sound great. I mean, Bernard gave me his Music Man bass from the Risque sessions, and which I still have. And it's like a, you know, whenever Duran start on a new album, the first track I will record, I'll use that bass, because nobody can question it. You know, nobody can say like, you sure that's a good bass sound? It's like everybody knows. You know, that's the fucking piece of wood that recorded Good Times. You know. We miss him a lot.
Yes, we do. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, I think that you're one of the most underrated bass players out there. Your groove is amazing. Now, what I wanted to ask is, besides Bernard, like, how, like, there was like some really funky stuff that you were doing with Duran Duran. So, was it just American, like, R&B, funk, or whatever that was influencing you in, or was there something coming from, you know, from the UK or something that got you that funk, that groove the way you were going? Because the stuff that I was listening to that wasn't Duran Duran from there didn't have quite that same funk and groove to it.
Well, I really think it was primarily Bernard's influence. I mean, there was other disco music. I mean, I cite "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," the Sylvester track, you know, which was the first track I really remember hearing that octave line, that use of the octave thing, and I remember thinking, wow, this is really easy.
Yeah.
You know, I can do that.
Yeah.
So that was like a signature, and I would use that those octave parts on every song at the beginning. You know, there'd be some point in the song where I go, and those, you know, those runs. I mean, I think that Bernard taught me about syncopation. You know, not playing on the beat, but you know, it was a very primitive. I often say about players like Bernard, they've forgotten more than I'll ever know. There's something. I mean, I was in the car with Roger recently, and the Carly Simon track "Why" came on, you know, and Bernard's bass kicks in, and you're like, fuck. I mean, like, I could practice for 24 hours a day for the next 20 years, and I wouldn't be able to play like that. I mean, he finds his way. But, you know, I found my own thing. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think that what we like, what excites us as listeners, is to hear people really giving their all. You know, whatever that is, whatever level that is. You know, and certainly with the first 3-4 Duran albums, I was playing the best I could possibly play. You know, and in some cases that just meant the fastest. You know, and it wasn't until the late sort of second wave of albums, like around about the time of Ordinary World, that I'd been to New York and I'd started hanging around the New York session players. And actually that was not a healthy thing for me, because then I started thinking, God, I can't play. you know, and I started getting self-conscious, and that's the worst thing. And I started hiding myself within the songs. And actually that sort of period around the Wedding album, Thank You, the bass is real low. And it really took Mark Ronson to bring me back out and say, no, JT, there's a thing that you do and nobody else does, and that's what I want to hear from you.
So Frank, we've only got time for one more question. Yeah.
Just like Everybody Dance by Sheep, something that really influenced you guys when you know it. Is there something I should know? Just something I heard as a kid, and you know, prior to that, I would probably want to be like an Air Force pilot or something like that. So that
Yes.
that changed my life. Thank you for that. My question actually though is, I know you played some keyboard bass on the road, you know, like the arcade values. So when you're songwriting away from the band, or just gelling out ideas, do you tend to gravitate towards piano or guitar, or I'm just curious?
I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, here today, because I think, like, you know, the bass player's role in this changing world, you know, and I think it's important to have an, you know, to not be frightened of turning to a keyboard. I mean, for me, I mean, you know, keyboard bass, it's not a particularly visual instrument, you know, and there's something about that, the presentation of holding a bass. But I think that, you know, if you're interested in making music that is on the cutting edge, you know, that is saying something that maybe hasn't been said quite that way before, I think we've got to be, we've not got to be afraid, basically. I mean, I quite like, when we're in band sessions, I quite enjoy turning to a keyboard. I will always have a keyboard set up, just a real simple, the one that's got, you know, like I've got a Korg, I've got this Korg keyboard anyway, and it's just got really strong bass sounds, you know. So I quite like that because it turns the sound upside down a little bit, you know. Yeah, I mean, we kind of got to. I mean, it's like that for drummers too. I mean, like drummers have had to adjust to so much stuff, you know. So I think it's probably smart to have just to be able to play some basic stuff on the keyboard. Yeah. Hey, thanks everybody. I hope this has been worthwhile.